I used to respect Barrister David Sherborne. Not anymore. Because letting your client show up with practically no evidence to back up their claim is just shameful. Now, don't get me wrong. Good lawyers represent bad clients all the time. I mean, there wouldn't be enough jobs to go around if they didn't. And it could happen in the reverse too. You could have a really strong, solid case and have a horrible lawyer absolutely ruin everything for you. But considering the appalling state of Harry's testimony, I would say this was a case of bad lawyer and bad client. Because as a lawyer myself, and mind you, I'm probably half David Sherborne's age and therefore half as experienced, I just couldn't wrap my head around just how ill-prepared Prince Harry was when he showed up to those 2 days of his testimony. The first blunder was when Harry decided not to show up on the first day, being the Monday, even though the judge specifically requested his presence in case opening arguments didn't take up the whole day and Harry could start off with his testimony and his cross-examination. Now, let me tell you this. From my experience, at least for us average Joes, if a judge tells you to show up, you better make sure you show up. Or at least tell them that you won't be able to show up because of some prior engagement, which, mind you, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get what you want. It depends on how serious that prior engagement is. And I can tell you that your daughter's second birthday probably won't cut it. What makes matters all the more worse for Harry is that he was actually in London by Monday. So it's not like he was still in California. And if this were just some average person like me or you, there would have probably been some type of consequence or reprimand. In some cases, at least here in Australia, if a party doesn't show up without prior notice, then a default judgment could be entered against them. So if you ask me, I mean, I don't know the details. I don't know if Harry was reprimanded, but it looks like we're already seeing the favoritism playing out for the elites of the world. You know, it's one set of rules and standards for them, and it's a different set of rules for us. Although it should be noted that Mr. Justice Fancourt was described to have been surprised by Harry's absence, which I'm going to interpret as a very polite way of saying appalled. In his opening argument, Mr. Sherborne states that Harry isn't here because of a vendetta that he has against the press. He wants to focus on the unlawful activities that he alleges the press were engaged in some 12 to 26 years ago. Now that we know the state of Harry's testimony, really? Then pray tell us why you allowed your client to testify without any evidence to back up his very serious allegations of criminal misconduct. And would you like to explain why he instead chose to utilize most of his 2 days of testimony to hash out his usual familiar diatribe of how he's always been living under a microscope and how much torment it's caused him? Isn't that his entire vendetta in a nutshell? As Harry's lawyer, there is no conceivable way that Mr. Sherborne and his team wouldn't have known just how bare Prince Harry's case against MGN is. Let me give you some insight from a lawyer. When you show up as a client to a lawyer and you present them with your case, if the lawyer is even half decent, they're going to ask you what evidence you have to back up your claims. And then they're going to want to see the evidence and collect it from you to start working and building your case for you. Based on Prince Harry's testimony, there doesn't seem to be any such evidence. And in fact, based on Prince Harry's answers to Andrew Green KC, MGN's lead barrister, it was clear that Harry has no idea how the justice system works. At many instances, Mr. Green presented Harry with evidence of other publications that published the exact same story, but before MGN and its subsidiaries ever did. And Harry didn't challenge this fact because he wasn't even aware of it. So where was his legal team's due diligence? Where was his due diligence? Why didn't they prepare for this and look into each and every one of these articles and find out whether what they published was exclusive and no one else had their hands on it? Because that would bolster Prince Harry's case. But it looks like his esteemed team didn't even do that basic work. And if they did, then they just left their client in the dark to make an utter fool out of himself in front of the entire world. There were also instances when Harry himself was the source of this information, which he'd given in authorized interviews years ago, which he'd forgotten about. And at certain times, he would respond in a way which clearly implied that he didn't understand that the burden of proof was on him and the other claimants to prove their case, because he'd say, well, you'd have to ask the journalists, or you'd have to ask my legal team. Yeah, but Harry, you're one of the claimants. You were put on the stand to prove your case to the best of your ability, not to pawn off your burden of proof to the other side or to your legal team in opening and closing submissions. And this is the kicker. This is where I really truly realized that Prince Harry's legal team have let him down. They clearly haven't briefed him and advised him and helped him understand how the justice system works. When he was asked if he had any proof of illegalities and phone hacking, he said,
"No, that's part of the reason I'm here, my lord."
Now you might think that Prince Harry is just an out-of-touch, privileged, and spoiled brat, and you may be correct in thinking so. But it was up to his lawyers to educate him and to inform him of the burden of proof and how it rests upon him and the other claimants and not anyone else. I've received a few comments which made me realize that many people seem to believe that because this is a civil case, Harry doesn't have to produce any evidence. And I'm here to tell you that that is entirely false. Please delete that notion out of your brain, because should you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to prove your case and it's a civil case, I don't want anyone getting shocked that you have to produce evidence to prove your case, whether civil, whether criminal. Yes, the standard of proof is different. Yes, it is a lot less onerous in civil cases, but it has to be met nonetheless. And it was clear that Prince Harry's team failed to inform him of this, or maybe they did, but he just refused to listen. Because yes, clients can do that too. That's what I meant. You can have good lawyers and bad clients. They can insist on going to court with zero evidence to back up their claims. And this is what we call a vexatious and frivolous litigant. I mean, the man literally admitted to not even reading the very articles in question, or at least not reading all of them, and that his legal team informed him of most of them.
So it wasn't a concern over any particular article that led you to go to solicitors?
No, I'd never been shown anything. It was all contained by the palace.
Which begs the question, as Andrew Green KC put it, if you hadn't read the articles, then how could you claim paranoia and distress as a result of their publication? If Harry's made anything clear in his testimony, it's that he didn't even dream of suing the press in this regard until 2018, after he met Meghan, when he bumped into his lawyer in France, which really lends to the notion that Meghan egged him on and encouraged him to pursue this case, particularly when you consider that Piers Morgan has been made a prime target in Prince Harry's testimony and in his statement. I mean, it's no secret that Meghan has always had it in for Piers. Look, at the end of the day, I believe that Mr. Sherborne's opening statement was misleading, because purely based on the lack of evidence, I do think this is all about a vendetta against the press. Harry hasn't made it a secret. He stated in multiple interviews that this is his calling. He wants to bring down the British press. And judging, on the number of cases that he has currently pending in the UK, it's really not a far-fetched notion that all of these cases are being used as weapons to achieve that goal. What matters in a court of law is meeting the standard of proof. So, what the judge should be looking at is whether Harry presented enough evidence to make it at least 51% probable that his allegations actually took place. Obviously, it remains to be seen how this case is decided because Harry's not the only claimant, and it will take weeks, if not months, for Mr. Justice Fancourt to hand down his judgment. So I don't want to kind of be preemptive and say that Harry's made a fool out of himself and, he's only embarrassed himself on the world stage, because he might yet score a win or two out of this. But unfortunately for Harry, speculation is not evidence. And he's done plenty of speculating on the witness stand and not nearly enough proving. It never ceases to amaze me how rampant Prince Harry's hypocrisy is. Because here we have a man who has made millions by violating his own family's privacy time and time again, fighting in a court of law for the protection of his own privacy, and without much evidence, if at all. And I'm not defending the tabloids and the press, I am a fiercely private individual myself, so I understand the want and the need to protect your privacy. And if Prince Harry hadn't made a career himself off of invading his family's most private and intimate details, then one could easily sympathize with him. But this case isn't about sympathy. And in fact, this case isn't about Harry living under a microscope. This case is about criminal activity and proving that it took place. Nothing more and nothing less. Now, of course, in Harry, it's a lot more. It's his crusade. And it was very clear, it came through in his testimony. But a judge's job is to cut all of that away and focus on the crux of the issue. And if the judge ends up doing just that, then I don't see how Prince Harry can win his claim. I am hearing some commentators say he could have a partial win. I personally don't know how, because he hasn't presented any evidence, but it's still viable. He is Prince Harry after all, and the judge might just want to give him that win or two. But that doesn't mean that he's going to win all 33 or so claims. It's clear that Prince Harry is an individual who is really struggling with letting go of his past. Not just about his mother, but about his ex-girlfriend, Chelsea Davy, and many other instances which really point out that he's just unwilling to let go, move on, and live his life. And for the 100th time, it really makes one wonder, where is his wife's support in all of this? I understand that he's an adult, he's almost 40, and it's on him to see things through. But just because someone is an adult, it doesn't mean that they don't need support and help. And it's really tragic to see that this man, who is practically screaming at the world, about how much pain he's in till this very day, isn't getting any of the support he so clearly needs, because he's been isolated by the very person who was meant to be his support. It's no coincidence that he seemed well and happy and adjusted even right before he met Meghan. He had a support system, and it showed. Speaking of Meghan, Harry wasn't the only one, unfortunately, humiliating himself on a world stage last week. It turns out that her podcast, Archetypes, was such a flop that Spotify had to lay off 200 employees because they lost so much money when they paid Meghan over $18 million for her podcast, and they failed to recoup any of it. I mean, wow. Meghan Markle just made a whole new load of enemies. These people probably held on to their jobs during the pandemic, but they couldn't survive Meghan. I personally can't say I'm surprised. I mean, I had to tune in to every single episode, even while I was in Europe, to cover it on this channel, and it was bad. If you want to sit there and listen to endless stories of victimhood and lies and narcissistic ramblings, then that's the podcast for you. It was truly just a display of how vapid that woman is, and just how far Spotify itself has sunk over the past few years, much like the other huge entity that threw millions on Meghan and Harry, Netflix. I've said this before, but does no one perform any due diligence when it comes to these two? Does anyone bother asking them to prove their worth before paying them millions upon millions of dollars? Because that's how the world works for the rest of us. You know, I don't get paid unless I deliver. And especially here on YouTube, if you don't meet people's expectations and entertain them and inform them and give them whatever it is they seek out of your content, you're not gonna get paid. It's plain and simple. But much like Elizabeth Holmes, this really reminds me of Elizabeth Holmes. I'm not calling Meghan and Harry frauds per se.
Yeah, I was such a fraud.
But Elizabeth too didn't have to prove her worth. You know, she just spewed fantastical claims of what her company and her inventions were capable of doing. And anyone who was anyone just poured their millions, their billions collectively into her and her vision, only to find out that she was just all talk and absolutely no walk. Tell me that's not pretty much what's been playing out here with Meghan and Harry. And speaking of not doing due diligence before investing something into these two, I wonder what all these awards, you know, the People's Choice Awards and the Gracie Awards, who awarded her Podcast of the Year, think about this news, because this is embarrassing. She had a team of, I don't know how many people, 28 people, if not more, working on that podcast with her. It was highly edited. It wasn't really much of a podcast anyway, and it still flopped. I personally believe that they only nominate the likes of Meghan because they want the attention that her name will bring. We've said multiple times how no one knew of any of these organizations until Meghan and Harry were given an award by them. So they're putting them on the map. That's all they wanted. Let this be a lesson to all those organizations who think that sucking up to the elites of the world, you know, who have nothing to offer us, is a good idea, rather than actually looking into and awarding and recognizing the hard work of relatively unknown people who produce stellar content. I guess we shouldn't be holding our breaths then for a second season of Archetypes, unless Spotify wants to lay off another 200 people. And the sad thing is, Meghan still gets to pocket that $18 million or over $18 million paycheck in her 16-bathroom, multi-million-dollar mansion, while 200 people now have to presumably scramble around to find another job in this current climate just to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads. It's such a sad state of events. It really is. And I know that even Meghan couldn't have anticipated the failure of her podcast. I mean, she thinks everything she touches turns into gold. But this is really all down to Spotify for putting so much trust and hope in an unproven person. So yeah, just hasn't been a good week for Prince Harry and his testimony, and this latest confirmation, official confirmation, that Archetypes is indeed a flopcast. And if they both weren't such horrible people, I would actually feel sorry for them. I'm not gloating at other people's misfortune, but this is karma. And they've been getting a lot of it this year. You know, karma has no mercy, and it certainly doesn't discriminate. Oh, and apparently they're not even invited to the King's first trooping of the colors, which is a big deal. And it's just a rumor at this point, but if it's true, then I would say good riddance.